if pike are perhaps getting pressured, or they're in one of their little fickle moods and they don't really want to commit to a bait, that could perhaps be the difference between getting a bite and not. Now obviously we've looked at the bite indication on dry land. Now what obviously aids and increases the bite indication is what's under the water as well. Now, like I said, we've got a lot of heavy weed down there, but there's also areas where it's really flat and completely clean. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably watched videos of pike staring at dead bait and leaving them and showing, just being a bit spooky of the bait and not wanting to commit to it. I think it's fair to say that we've learned in the last few years, with the underwater cameras which are available, we've seen a lot more pike behaviour which we never would have known about in the past. Now, fishing in weed, obviously it's different because you've got that weed kind of masking your rig, it's covering it all up, it's not really like going to spook for fish. And what we would use for the weed, fishing in weed, is one of these leisure stems, for instance. Obviously what this does with a heavy lead on a bottom, like I say, 5 ounce is sort of my minimum I'll use. If you imagine that lead will sit like so, and then your leisure stem sits up here, large run ring, and then obviously the braid can pass through that, but with it being popped up, that means that it's not going to be in the weed and it's going to be able to run through there nice and easily and give you good bite indication back at the alarm. Now, like I say, fishing in weed, that's perfect, but if you imagine that on a flat bottom, it does stick out quite a lot. Now, if pike are perhaps getting pressured, or they're in one of their little fickle moods and they don't really want to commit to a bait, that could perhaps be the difference between getting a bite and not. We can't say for definite, but I think, as I've heard a lot of people always talk about, them little percentages, if that is something we can try and increase, if something we can try and make better, then we should. Now, a little product which I've been working on and been using to great effect is this little run ring. So basically this has got a stainless steel inner surrounded by plastic, and then your swivel of your lead basically just fits into the bottom of it like so, and then you can just take a small pin. So you've got the single pin, that pin can then go into there, and then that just locks that in place. Now what that means is that you can keep all your line and your braid and your trace all nice and low to the bottom, just keeping it a lot more discreet. Now that's perfect for when you're fishing over a hard bottom or any clean bottoms basically. Now, one of the other interesting things with this is, and this is what we kind of take away from the carp boys. Now, these PVA strips, these are great, and these can also, once you pop out the pin, you can put one of these in here, put it through. If basically you're expecting to be fishing at, say, longer range and maybe you've got weed beds in between you. For instance, I was fishing a water last week where I was having to bait boat out about 150 yards. So obviously bite indication had to be perfect, and not to mention when I got about 70 yards in, I had a big weed bed. And because I'm fishing such long range, I was fishing heavy leads around 8 ounces. So the last thing I wanted was an 8 ounce lead just hanging on the rig still. Or if it was, I didn't want it to be fixed. Now the great things with these PVA strips, when you put them in, they will hold really strong. Even when wet, you will still be able to wind in without a fish on the end and get your lead back. The only time that lead will come back is if you're bringing a fish back and say the lead was to get snagged in the weed. When you're pulling, it'll pop straight out and it'll break that PVA strip. And that just then means that you're in direct contact with that pike. You haven't got 8 ounces bringing it down, brought it to the surface, and a lot of the fight will be head thrashing along the top, which is often quite scary, but it will be, you bring it up to the top quickly, and then you don't have to worry about all them sort of weed beds. But like I say, the main reason for this is obviously to keep it down low and keep everything discreet, and hopefully bring on an extra bite or two.